things over to our coordinator of the Becoming Outdoors Woman program, Linda Bylander, to get us started.
Thank you, Amber. I'm Linda Bylander at the Becoming Outdoor Woman program, and I'm so excited today to have Allie Dart, who's a program recreation specialist with the Three Rivers Park District. Becoming Outdoor Woman program has worked with Three Rivers Park Districts for the last 20-some years, even before I was the bow coordinator, to offer additional programs for women outreach and for family outreach. So Three Rivers Parks is really gracious to offer women-only paddling programs that Allie will talk about. And if you're not familiar with the bow program, I do offer an e-newsletter monthly with programs that are coming up. I recommend you going to our DNR website, typing in the words Becoming Outdoor Woman. You'll come to my website and you'll see some of the options available to women out there and to families. So right now I'd like to welcome Allie to give our presentation on paddling basics. Unmute yourself, Allie, sorry.
All right, sorry about that, everybody. This is my first time using WebEx, so I am still getting used to it. Hopefully you can hear me now. Like Linda said, my name is Allie Dart. I'm a recreation program specialist with Three Rivers Park District Outdoor Rec School. I use she, her pronouns. There we go. That is me out on the beautiful Mississippi River. If you're not familiar with Three Rivers Park District, we are located primarily in the West Metro of the Twin Cities. This map here is a little bit hard to see, but right here where my cursor is, hopefully you can see my cursor there, is Minneapolis. So West Metro and all those green spaces are Three Rivers Parks. Three Rivers occupies the ancestral lands of the Dakota people, and the Dakota and Ojibwe people have been paddling the waters of what is now Minnesota since the beginning of memory. And they continue to be an integral part of our communities here in Minnesota. The mission of Three Rivers Park District is to promote environmental stewardship through recreation and education in a natural resources-based park system. And we have over 27,000 acres of land that we manage in the West Metro. So if you haven't visited our parks, I hope that you will. There are some pretty amazing spaces that we have. And one of the great things about a lot of our parks is many of them include water that is great for recreation. So I'm here to talk today about paddling. And specifically, I'm going to talk about three different types of paddling: paddling canoes, paddling kayaks, and paddling paddleboards, or sometimes called stand-up paddleboards. But one of the things that I love about paddleboards is that you don't have to stand up on them. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute as well. So canoes, if you are not familiar with canoes, in a canoe you sit typically on seats, and most often people paddle tandem canoes, which are two-person canoes. And therefore, they take a lot of cooperation and coordination. So I think it's sort of a funny thing in Minnesota. People think if you were born in Minnesota, you were born with a canoe paddle in your hands kind of thing, which is definitely untrue. And most people are not born with innate canoeing skills. It takes some time and practice to learn. So if you haven't canoed before and you get out there to try it, just give yourself some grace and give some grace to your paddling partner as well. Canoes can also be paddled solo. There are canoes that are made specifically for paddling solo, and then there are folks who like to paddle a tandem canoe solo as well. And if you would like, you could have a third or four-person doing what's called duffing, which means sitting in those middle sections of the canoe where you see that tackle box in this canoe. Sitting on the bottom of the canoe. You want to make sure you don't exceed the weight limit of the canoe, but especially if you're a family with a couple of smaller kids, they can sit in the canoe with you as well. When we canoe, we use generally a single bladed paddle like the one you see in the picture, and so it's common to switch sides at different times while you're paddling the canoe. One of my favorite things about canoes is that they can haul a lot of gear. So they're great for going on paddle camping trips. And we're really lucky in Minnesota and being close to Wisconsin that there are a ton of different places to go canoe camping. You can go up to the iconic Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness, but also there are a lot of great water trails, which are typically rivers in Minnesota and Wisconsin, that have campsites along the way that you can camp on. And so that's just a really awesome way to be outside and explore those outdoor spaces. And canoes are most often these days made of aluminum or plastic or Kevlar, but also are sometimes made of fiberglass, carbon fiber, wood, or combinations of those materials. So you'll see all different types of canoes out there. Kayaks, when you're kayaking, you're typically sitting closer to the water than you would in a canoe, and with your legs out in front of you most of the time, as opposed to in a canoe where you're usually sitting up on a seat with your knees bent in front of you, or sometimes kneeling in a canoe. But in a kayak, you're sitting down as the person you see here is, and that person's legs are out in front of them inside this kayak. There are solo and tandem or two-person kayaks. And you would use a double-bladed paddle usually when you kayak. So like the one in the photo there, there's a blade at each end, and you paddle on alternate sides using that double-bladed paddle. There are some kayaks that can haul gear for camping, like the one you see in the photo. That black circle at the front of the kayak is a hatch cover, and you can put gear into the hatch there. But usually you need your gear to be a little bit more compact than you would in a canoe. There are a ton of different types of kayaks. So there are long sea kayaks for paddling on big lakes or out on the ocean. There are short whitewater kayaks made for running rapids and rivers. There are recreational kayaks that are for generally smaller lakes and lazy rivers. The one that you see in the photo is a longer recreational kayak. There are sit-on-top kayaks so the one that you see in the photo is a sit-in kayak. So the person's legs are inside the cavity of that kayak. But there are also ones that you sit on top of, and there are inflatable kayaks that can be deflated to put into a car. So all different kinds for both different purposes and just different kind of approaches to paddling. And one thing that you do want to make sure that you're aware of if you are getting in a kayak, buying a kayak, whatever it may be, is whether or not your kayak is going to float if it flips over. So if it's made of really any of the materials listed on the slide here, it will float somewhat. But if it's a sit-in kayak and the cockpit, which is the part that you would sit in, if it fills with water, in some kayaks, there is built-in flotation. Like in the one that you see in this photo, there are built-in air spaces in that. But a lot of recreational kayaks that you can buy for a few $100s at like a big box store, they don't necessarily have built-in flotation. And once they fill up with water, if you tip them over, it will be very hard to get them back out of the water. So little pro tip, if you have one of those, buy a couple of beach balls at a dollar store or whatever, inflate them and shove them into the front and back of the kayak to give your kayak a little extra flotation. So that's some quick basics with kayaks. Paddleboards, or you'll sometimes hear them called SUPs or supping, stand-up paddleboard is what that stands for. Those are fairly new and becoming a lot more popular. We see tons of them out on the lakes. You'll see folks at the parking lot blowing them up with a pump because they do come as either solid or inflatable. And they're really versatile. That's one of my favorite things about them. The person in the photo here is kneeling on the paddleboard. You can also sit on a paddleboard, or you can stand up. And I believe if there haven't already been, there will be some photos of people standing up on paddleboards. So when it's really windy, you can sit down and make your board a little bit more stable. You typically use a single-bladed paddle that has a long handle for stand-up paddleboarding so that you can use it while you're standing up and still reach the water. Another great thing about paddleboards is that they're relatively easy to get back on if you fall off of them. If you fall out of a canoe or out of most types of kayaks, it can be a little bit of a challenge if you haven't done it before. or if you don't have any help, to get yourself back into the boat. But stand-up paddle boards are relatively easy to get on and off of. And like the other watercraft, they can be made of a bunch of different materials. They're most commonly made of inflatables made of PVC, or solid made of plastic or fiberglass, but you'll also find some in other materials as well. One thing to note, if you own a watercraft, if it is 10 feet or longer in the state of Minnesota, it needs to be registered with the DNR. And I think Amber will be maybe dropping a link about registration in the chat, but that's something that you can do often through the local DMV, is register your boats. All right, we're going to talk a little bit about safety. So anything that's happening on the water inherently has risk to it. And there are a lot of ways to manage the risk with paddling, but it's one of those things where if you don't really know what the risks are, you can't manage them. So my number one safety tip for paddling is to always wear a properly fitted life jacket. I have been a lifeguard for many years. I've been paddling and instructing paddling for many years, but every time I go out paddling, I wear my life jacket properly. And the reason for that is that you never know when you're going to end up in the water. And often if you end up in the water, it's not something that you were expecting. If you end up in the water unintentionally, something has gone wrong, whether you are having a medical emergency or the waves are a lot bigger than you expected or whatever it might be. And in those instances, it's going to be really hard if you can even reach your life jacket. If your boat hasn't blown away from you or something, it's really, really hard to put a life jacket on when you're already in deep water. So highly recommend just wearing that life jacket. In the state of Minnesota, it is the law that anyone under 10 years of age must be wearing a properly fitted life jacket if they are on a watercraft. Anyone over 10 or 10 and older, I guess, does not have to wear one, but they must have one accessible that fits them properly on the watercraft. And while that is the law, I would highly encourage you to wear the life jacket and get a life jacket that's going to be comfortable enough. You want to make sure that it's a Coast Guard approved life jacket, that it fits you well, and that it's in good condition. So it shouldn't be fading, there shouldn't be tears or rips, the buckles should all be and zippers in good condition and working. So that is my number one tip, is life jackets. There are different places that you can paddle. Some of them have moving water like rivers and creeks, and some of them are flat water like lakes. And I would really recommend starting on flat water. There are a lot of extra obstacles that happen in moving water that are caused by currents and things that may be in the water. And you want a little bit of a higher skill level to handle those things. And they can create riskier conditions once someone is in the water than it would on flat water. So definitely recommend starting out on flat water. Another thing that we think a lot about when we go paddling are something that we call the 5 W's. They are a set of 5 things that begin with the letter W. You can see the list there. And they are kind of how we consider risks when going out paddling. Each of the 5 things you can assess both individually and thinking about them combined. So if one of them is really bad, then it might just not be good to go out paddling. But maybe none of them is really bad, but 3 of them are iffy. That might be an indication that that day is not a good day to go paddling. So weather is the first one, and what we mean by weather is mostly thunderstorms. You want to check the forecast before you go out, and even when you get to the lake, be keeping an eye on the sky, looking for thunderhead clouds, listening for thunder, looking for lightning. If you hear thunder or see lightning, you should stay off the water or get off the water as quickly and safely as possible and remain off the water until 30 minutes after the last lightning that you see or thunder that you hear. Lightning can travel a really long distance and is pretty unpredictable. So, and often if you are out on the lake, even though you're sitting in, say, a kayak, you might be the tallest thing in a very wide open space, and that's what lightning goes for. The second W is water, and what we mean by that in this case is water temperature. We go by something called the rule of 120, which is if the water temperature in degrees Fahrenheit plus the air temperature in degrees Fahrenheit does not equal at least 120 degrees Fahrenheit, you want to think about some cold water mitigation. Hypothermia is a really real risk, even on a warm day. If the water is cold, or the water is warm and it's a cold day, hypothermia can happen really quickly. So if you don't meet that 120, you want to consider wearing a wetsuit or a dry suit, or at the very least staying really close to shore, having a dry set of clothes in a dry bag that you could change into. But hypothermia is real, and especially in the shoulder seasons in the spring and fall, it's something to really keep in mind. The third W is wind. When we're thinking about wind, we're thinking about wind speed and direction. So typically, we will recommend against paddling if the wind is over 15 miles an hour. If it's 10 to 15 miles an hour, you maybe want to be more cautious if you're a beginning paddler. And you want to think about what direction it's coming from. So is it coming across a really wide open span of lake where it's going to have time to cause waves to pick up? Or is there shoreline that you can paddle along that's going to be blocking the wind and give you some calmer area? When you head out for paddling, you want to try whenever you can, and this isn't always possible, but try to paddle against the wind as you go out at the beginning of your paddle, and then have the wind at your back as you come back. If you go out with the wind at your back and go a long way and then get tired, you're going to have a lot of work to do to battle the wind coming back. So just keep in mind where that wind is coming from. The fourth W is waves. Waves can be caused by wind and by other boats as well. And so my recommendation would be that if you're seeing whitecaps out on the lake, that you don't go out that day unless you're an experienced paddler. If you do encounter waves, maybe from a wake boat or from the wind picking up, try to paddle at a 45 to 90 degree angle, either into the waves or with the waves coming at the back of your boat. What you don't want is for those waves to hit you broadside, so hitting the long side of the boat, because that can cause the boat to become a lot more unstable. So that's a little bit about waves. And then the last one is well-being. So rather than focusing on the environment, you want to focus on yourself. So making sure that you have the proper clothing for whatever is going on with the weather and temperature. Having sunscreen on, making sure you are well hydrated and that you have water to stay hydrated, that you have calories in you and you have some snacks with you to keep yourself fueled up, that you're in a good headspace. You know, you're not super distracted by something that is going on in your life that's going to keep you from focusing on making good, safe decisions when you're out on the water, that you have a lot of energy, you're not too tired, and that you are not injured or feeling sick. So those are some of the things about well-being. And you want to consider that not just for yourself, but anybody that you might be going out paddling with as well. Because when you paddle in a group, which I recommend, as you see here, paddle with others is one of the tips. You know, everybody's choices and how everybody's feeling affects everyone else in the group. So consider these 5 W's as individual things. If it's thunderstorming, don't go out paddling. But also if there's 10-mile-an-hour winds and the water plus air temperature only equals 105 degrees and you're feeling a little iffy today, maybe it's not a good time to go out. So that's kind of how the W's work. And if things change while you're out on the water, make sure that you are paying attention to that and adapting. With all of this, it's important to know your abilities. So one of the ways that you can mitigate risk is to stay closer to shore, so that if you do tip, you can get at least yourself, if not yourself and your boat, to shore easily. And if you don't know how to do a self-rescue, or you and your friends that you're out with don't know how to do assisted rescues out in deep water, you should stay close to shore so that you are not stuck floating out in the middle of the water not knowing what to do. And that is also going to be a lot safer if any of those W's are a little iffy. So you can mitigate risk. You can't remove it completely, but keeping in mind all of these things will help. And then the last one on here is leave a float plan. And what I mean by that is make sure that somebody who is staying on land, who you trust, they don't need to be there at the lake with you, but you know, your friend or spouse or whoever that's back at home, that you let them know where you're going, what paddlecraft you're paddling, who you're paddling with, when you plan to be back, And when you come back, you should text them or call them to let them know that you're back. And then what to do if they don't hear from you. Maybe it's to call you and check in. And if you don't answer, then it's to call authorities. And I can promise you that the folks who show up when you make a call about someone not returning from paddling, those folks who show up to look for the person, they would much rather have you call, get out there and find that the person is totally fine than have you wait to call and then get there and find out that something really awful has happened. So definitely just know that that is something to keep in mind. And when water is involved, it is, you know, a little bit more urgent maybe than in other situations to report if someone is missing. So what to bring factors into safety here. On the screen, you'll see a PFD, a personal flotation device, a hat for some sun protection, as well as sunglasses with a cord on them that are going to keep them out of the water if they fall off my face. There is a whistle there. That orange string on the dry bag is a whistle. Whistles are much easier to signal for help than just shouting. It's going to carry better over the water than your voice. I like to bring my phone out with me. Usually I am returning after I told that person that has my float plan, and it's good to be able to reach out to them and say, hey, I'm running a half hour late, but I'm fine. And I like to take pictures and stuff too, but I do like to carry my phone in a waterproof case. So that's what you see on the left side of the dry bag there. I like to bring some snacks and water as well. So there's a granola bar and a water bottle there. Some sunscreen. There's a rain jacket here, which on a summer paddling day would be both my kind of extra warm layer as well as a layer for rain if that comes up. And a small first aid kit can be good to have too, just in case something happens. And then a bunch of that stuff is sitting on top of that green thing, which is a dry bag. And so I can put my rain jacket, my sunscreen, my granola bar, my first aid kit, all of that stuff in the dry bag to keep it dry. So that is what I typically bring on a summer day paddle. You would obviously have a lot more gear for a longer trip. And in the winter, or not the winter, things freeze here, but in the shoulder season, if you're paddling in colder conditions, you might have hand warmers and stuff to start a fire in case something happens, as well as more layers and dry clothes to put on. All right, so there are lots of opportunities to learn to paddle. Some of those are available through the organization that I work for, Three Rivers Park District. I'm going to share some about our programs in a minute. The DNR has an I Can Paddle program that I'm also going to talk about. And then there's a few other programs here that are going to be on a later slide as well. And it can be really good to start out by getting some instruction from someone who knows what they're talking about. What I am giving you today is a good outline, but it's really different to actually get out there and be physically in a boat and trying it. It could be nice to have someone give you some tips on how to hold your paddle, how to move the paddle through the water, how to work with your paddling partner if you're in a canoe, how to get up on your stand-up paddleboard, things like that. So at Three Rivers, we offer flat water, canoe, kayak, and stand-up paddleboard lessons for youth, families, and adults. We also offer some nature and history focused tours. So if you already have some paddling experience and just don't have your own boat, or you want to learn some things, or you want to meet other people to paddle with, those can be a good option. The bottom picture you see there is one of our adapted kayaks. And I'm not going to talk too much about that today, but if people have questions, I can. We do offer some adapted kayaking program at Three Rivers. And we also have some river rafting tours. We have one of our parks, Mississippi Gateway Regional Park, which is on the Mississippi River, and they offer some kind of lazy river rafting tours and inflatable rafts. For Three Rivers programs, all of the equipment is provided when you sign up for a program, and the fees range from $10 to $50 depending on the program. We do have financial assistance available through our Recreation Pass Plus program, which can be found on our website. And if you have questions about that later on, I can answer those as well. I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide, but this is a list of some upcoming Three Rivers Parks paddling programs, and just wanted to give you some idea of what we offer. We have some programs for folks in the 50+ demographic. We have a hidden history canoe tour. We have our family kayaking program. Flat water kayaking essentials is a 3-hour kind of slightly deeper dive into kayaking, good for folks who want to start kayaking on their own. Standard stand-up paddleboard lessons as well. And Linda mentioned that we have women's programming at Three Rivers, and it just so happens that we don't have any more scheduled this summer, but we might have a few in the fall, and definitely we'll have some next summer as well. I mentioned the DNR I Can Paddle programs. This is a really awesome program that happens in state parks all over Minnesota. So you can go onto the website. I think Amber will drop a link to that in the chat. You can go on to the DNR website and see a list of when it's happening at different state parks. And they offer kayaking in lakes, rivers, and sea kayaking on Lake Superior. They also offer flatwater canoe and canoe camping classes. And so that's a really great way to try out paddling, especially if you are outside of the Twin Cities area, although there are some I Can Paddle programs here in the Twin Cities. But if you're outside of the Twin Cities, that is a good way to get started with paddling. And those programs also have all equipment provided. Depending on the program, the fees range from $10 to $85 per person. And that $85, I think, is actually an overnight canoe camping program, so still a pretty good deal. You do need a state parks vehicle permit if you're bringing a vehicle into the parks, but that is an investment worth making, in my opinion, because we have amazing state parks across Minnesota. So I Can Paddle is for fairly intro level, as are most of those Three Rivers Park District classes, and they're a great way to get started. A few other opportunities, if you are in the Twin Cities, the National Park Service through Mississippi National River and Recreation Area and coordinated through the Friends group for that park, has a Paddle with a Ranger program. So you can go out with a park ranger either on a canoeing program or a kayaking program on the Mississippi River, which is more of a tour. You do need a little bit of experience for those. Or they have introductory adaptive paddling on Pickerel Lake over in St. Paul. So those are a couple of cool opportunities there. The DNR Becoming an Outdoors Woman program has a Boundary Waters canoe trip for women coming up September 14th to 19th. And we can get you some more information about that if you are interested in that. Really cool opportunity to try out canoe camping with a great group of folks. The REI has some kayak and SUP lessons and tours across various Twin Cities locations, and they do offer kind of a second level kayak class, a kayak rescues class that is worth checking out if you are a little bit more of an advanced paddler but wanting to learn how to do assisted and self-rescues. There's a nonprofit organization in the Twin Cities, that lower photo that you see, called Wilderness Inquiry, and they do lots of different canoe and kayaking trips all over Minnesota, Wisconsin, and sometimes elsewhere across the United States. The canoe that they're paddling there is a large 10-person canoe that's 24 feet long, and they paddle those on the Mississippi and Minnesota rivers, as well as lots of other locations. So that's a unique way to get larger groups of folks out paddling, and a really fun thing to do. You can find some classes with different city parks and rec departments as well, and also local outfitters. One thing that's worth noting about paddling with local outfitters is just making sure, not everybody does things in the same way, and it's worth just checking up on who you're going to go paddling with. So the things that you want to look for is making sure that that outfitter has liability insurance, that their guides have qualifications of some kind, and that both their guides and the participants paddling are required to wear life jackets. Those are signs that that operation is taking safety seriously and knows what they're doing. So I would not recommend going out with an operation that does not have those three things in place at least. And throughout greater Minnesota, there are lots of outfitters all over, and lots of other guide services, teaching and all. And so you can look up some of those. Some of them are affiliated with the national parks around Minnesota and Wisconsin, and with the state parks. So those are some ways to get kind of plugged into who is doing paddling in different parts of the state. And then another opportunity is for renting Paddlecraft. So at Three Rivers Park District, we have opportunities to rent canoes, kayaks, paddle boards, as well as some other like rowboats and paddle boats and things like that. I think that Amber is dropping a link in the chat for that. And it varies across different parks what type of paddlecraft they have, when their rental operations are open. So check out the website for that, and you can reserve those rental craft online, or you can show up in person and reserve them at the time that you want to paddle. But lots of opportunities there all over kind of the West Metro of the Twin Cities. Similarly, Minnesota State Parks have, if they have water, they probably have boats to rent. And sometimes it's directly through the park. Sometimes they have an outfitter kind of based in the park that they run the rentals through. But you can look online for information about what types of boats each park has and when they're available to rent, how much they cost, things like that. There are parks with canoes, kayaks, paddle boards, and that can be a really fun way, especially if you're going camping at a park, to kind of add some extra fun to your weekend or week at the park, is to rent some paddlecraft and go explore whatever water is in the park. Here in the Twin Cities, we have an awesome and kind of unique, I guess, program. There aren't too many places in the country where this exists, called PaddleShare. They exist on the Mississippi River. There should be a link in the chat soon about this as well. On the Mississippi River, you paddle from like point A to point B in the kayaks that you rent through PaddleShare. And when you get to the end, you stow the kayak in a locker or on a rack, and someone will come and get them and bring them back to the beginning. So all you have to do is go online, reserve the boat, watch a safety video, and then show up. And at that point A, there will be a life jacket, a paddle, and the kayak for you in this locker. You put it in the water, paddle down the river, put it in the locker at the other end, kind of thing. So really simple way, if you don't have your own boat, to still be able to get on the river and not even have to worry about shuttling back and forth to get back to your car at all. Other than, I think there's maybe one station or two stations that don't work for this, but you can even combine this with the bike share program in the cities, and get a bike at the end and bike back up to your car at the beginning. So cool opportunity. And then if you are a little bit nervous about being on the river, and I would definitely advise that if you don't have experience paddling on moving water, or if you're new to paddling in general, I would start with flat water. And there are flat water stations at Taft Park and Twin Lakes. Both of those are available through the Three Rivers website, the rental link that Amber dropped earlier. There's information there about the paddle share sites at Taft and Twin Lakes. And then the Mississippi River Paddle Share has a station on Pickerel Lake in St. Paul. So those are some local opportunities for the Twin Cities. And then across the state, again, there are local outfitters. Here in the cities, the University of Minnesota gear rental program can be a great way to get a boat to go up to the Boundary Waters or go on a canoe camping trip if you're able to transport the boat. And REI also has boat and gear rentals, same kind of style of things. So those are a couple of opportunities. And then, of course, there are outfitters up in the Boundary Waters and on Lake Superior and all sorts of places where you can rent boats locally and not have to transport them potentially. So that was a ton of information. I would love to get folks' questions in. I think Amber and Linda are going to jump in with those. If you are interested in seeing how to actually go online to register for Three Rivers programs or rent boats through Three Rivers, put a note in the Q&A that that's something you'd like to see, because I can show that on here today, but I won't show that if that's not something that people are interested in. But I know that our website can be a little bit challenging. And another option to register for programs or rent boats through Three Rivers is to call the number that's on the screen right now, 763-559-6700. And the folks who will answer the phone on that line can help tell you what programs are available and get you registered or get a boat rented for you through that. So I am going to stop sharing my screen, hopefully. And yeah.
Thank you so much, Allie. That was very comprehensive, and I really appreciate all of the safety information and the wearing the life jackets, and then calling for help. It's all very good information. And I don't think there's any questions. People wanted to know where to watch recording later. Benji put that in for us. And unless Amber, you see some questions I don't see.
I have not seen any questions come through in the Q&A. If anyone does have questions, please feel free to type those in.
Okay, great. Just in the meantime, while we're waiting, the Three Rivers Park District is a great to learn how to paddle. So is the ICANN program with Minnesota State Parks. So if you've never tried any of these canoe, kayak, stand-up paddleboard, I would highly recommend going to an ICANN program or a Three Rivers program just to try out the equipment before you invest the time and energy into purchasing that equipment. So we do have one question. Courtney asks, would the boat rentals also have life jackets?
Absolutely, yes. So if you go someplace to rent a boat and they do not provide a life jacket, you should not rent from there. You should be questioning whether their boats are even safe to paddle. With Three Rivers and renting through any of the state parks, they will provide the life jacket and paddle. Sometimes they're not the most comfortable life jackets. So if you're going to be doing a lot of renting boats and going out paddling, you may want to explore getting a life jacket that you like. Because if you have a life jacket that is comfortable for you, you're much more likely to wear it. So if it's one of those like big orange horse collar life jackets, you're probably not going to want to wear that. They're not super comfortable. And that's what some rental places offer. They will keep you floating if you wear them properly, but they're not very comfortable. But definitely at any Three Rivers Park or state park, they're going to provide a life jacket. And at any outfitter, you want to look at the life jacket that they give you. Is it Coast Guard approved? You don't want it the color to be faded or for there to be rips and tears in the fabric. You want all of the straps on it to be in good shape and not fraying or torn, all of the buckles in good shape, all of that. Yeah.
And the same with the DNR programs, we require life jackets to be worn as a safety precaution. So we highly recommend life jackets. Allie, there's life jackets just for paddling sports, isn't there? There's a special kind of life jacket that has more space under your arms. And
yeah, so there are 5 types of flotation devices that are approved by the Coast Guard. And so you'll see if you look on the label inside a life jacket, you'll see it'll say type 3 or something like that. So types 1, 2, and 3, you can wear paddling, but type 3 is the most common kind for paddling, and they tend to be designed as a more comfortable life jacket for paddling. And within type 3, there's all sorts of different styles and fits. So like I have one that's a women's fit, and so it has a little bit of a different shape on the upper chest to accommodate breasts more easily. There are ones that have a higher back on them so that the back of the life jacket is above the seat in the kayak, so that you don't have like that chunk of padding between you and the seat as you might with some of those kind of more like the kind that you see at rental places a lot, have like the back that goes all the way down to your waist. So all different cuts and shapes and things like that, different pockets and everything. So there's a lot out there, but make sure that's Coast Guard approved. And I would recommend a type 3. Type 5 is often for specific types of water sports, like a safety, like a rescue PFD for whitewater rafting or for sea kayaking, or a PFD for wakeboarding or something like that. And those can be fine for paddling recreationally too. Just if it has extra features and things like that, make sure that you know how to use them. That you know how to use them. I'll leave it at that. There are also different sizes of PFDs. So there are infant size PFDs. There are child size, which are typically 30 to 50 pound weight range. So if you weigh between 30 and 50 pounds, you want the child size. Youth is 50 to 90 pounds. And then adult PFDs are typically for anyone 90 pounds and up, which sounds a little bit weird because people can weigh much more than 90 pounds. But typically a body's buoyancy or a body will provide enough buoyancy with that flotation, regardless of how much the person weighs. And then within those 90 pounds and up, there are different sizes as far as how much the PFD can expand to accommodate different chest sizes or contract to accommodate smaller chest sizes. So just make sure that it actually fits, that you can get it snug enough on your body and that you can actually clip it up or zip it up the way that it should be, that the straps aren't too short or too long. With that.
Great. There's another question from Todd. I'm considering purchasing a stand-up paddleboard. Do you have any recommendations or pros, cons to share when considering rigid versus inflatable stand-up paddleboards?
Yeah, great question. And I am a big fan of inflatable boards because I can deflate them and fold them up and put them in my car. I mean, I have a rack on the top of my car for boats, and that's nice, but not everybody has that. And if I'm traveling a long distance, I don't necessarily want to have a boat strapped to the top of my car. So the inflatable aspect of that is really nice. You do, of course, need to be a little bit careful. You don't want to smash it into really sharp rocks, although they're pretty thick PVC, so you'll probably be okay. You should not leave an inflatable board completely inflated out in really hot sun for long periods of time. I have seen a friend's board explode, not in a dangerous way, but in a, wow, that was a really expensive piece of equipment and now it's not usable anymore kind of way. And so the other thing with inflatable boards is you have to pump them up, and you have to pump them up to a high enough PSI, pounds per square inch, to have them be rigid once they're inflated. And that can be a lot of work if you're doing it with a hand pump. You can get a pump that you can plug into the AC adapter in your car. And so that makes things easier if you, if you're near your car when you need to inflate it. On the solid side, you don't have to inflate it, which is great. That is really nice. And, it's going to potentially be a little bit less affected by running it into things and all. It's not going to deflate accidentally in the middle of your paddle or something if there is a pinprick hole in it or something. And you can, I guess technically you have maybe a little bit more control over a solid board than an inflatable board, but really with the inflatable ones, if you get them to the right level of pressure in there, they're a very rigid board. So I'm maybe a little bit partial to inflatables, but I also don't own one and don't have to pump one up every time I want to go. So.
Great. Courtney says, thanks so much for an excellent presentation. So I don't see any other questions, and Amber, if you don't see any, I think this is an excellent presentation. I thank you so much, Allie, for taking the time. I encourage people to go to Three Rivers Parks, their paddling programs, go to their website. It is a little harder to navigate, but that phone number will get you right to it. Also the ICANN program, and then the boat program. Linda Newman up in Hovland, Minnesota does a Boundary Waters trip, a beginner easy Boundary Waters program. Wait, there's another question.
Yeah, there is a last minute question that came in. Sorry, it came in as you were ending. Amanda's just wondering if you can share maybe some tips or techniques for how to avoid zigzagging when canoeing with two people. We can't necessarily demonstrate a total paddle technique right now, but are there any highlights on how to avoid that back and forth?
Yeah, the perennial question. Yeah. So I guess the first thing that I would say is communication with your paddling partner is key. Historically, what people have taught is that the person who's in the stern or the back of the canoe does the steering. And I would say that's mostly true, although if they want to, the person in the bow in the front of the canoe can have a lot of influence over it as well. One of the things that you want to be really aware of is to not overcorrect. So if your boat starts to go too far to the left and you do a paddle stroke to correct that, right as the nose of the boat starts to turn back to the right, stop making that correction. If you keep making that correction until the boat is straight, the boat's going to have that residual momentum and start to swing too far to the right. So you want to try to make more micro corrections, especially if it's really windy. It is totally fine to switch sides back and forth a whole bunch. Like if you talk to expert canoeists, they'll tell you like you should be able to stern from just one side of the canoe and keep your boat going straight. Like, first of all, when you are a beginner paddler, it's totally fine to switch sides. When you're paddling on the right, the boat's going to go more to the left and vice versa. And it's okay to switch back and forth to help with that correction. But then when it's really windy, sometimes to keep, if you're paddling into the wind, to keep that forward momentum, all you can do is be switching back and forth to keep your boat straight and moving forward. So those are the things that I would say. And just until you and your bow paddler have a good system worked out together, be patient with each other, and maybe, you know, ask them to let you in the stern, or if you're in the bow, let the person in the stern direct things. Hopefully they're doing that directing in a kind and gentle way. We joke sometimes that canoes can either be friendships or divorce ships. Yeah, it takes some practice, but when you have two people who aren't communicating and are both trying to steer the boat, that's when things really go poorly. But it sounds like from your question that it's more that kind of zigzagging over correction that's the problem. And so just focus on correcting until the boat just starts going towards where you want it to go, and then start paddling straight again. Yeah.
Great.
And one other thing, oh, go ahead, Linda.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, Linda was encouraging folks to, if they're beginners, to sign up for programs either through Three Rivers or through I Can Paddle. I will also say that we end up working with certainly a handful every summer, but sometimes more than that, adults who had a bad paddling experience as kids, whether it was at summer camp or through school or something like that, and have been just avoided going paddling for their entire lives. And now they're like, maybe I want to try this again because all my friends are doing it. A class through Three Rivers, and I would imagine also through the I Can program, although I haven't personally done an I Can program, those folks know how to work with people who are nervous about paddling and are new to paddling. And so I would encourage you to take a class and give it a try, because paddling is awesome. And I understand that it can be scary, especially if you've had a bad experience. But definitely our staff at the Outdoor Rec School of Three Rivers, we know how to help folks out with that. So I hope that you'll give it another chance.
Yeah, and plus with your program and the I Can program, all the equipment is provided, so you can try it out before purchasing. Don asked, is there a website you know of that has signs of life jackets that are old and need to be replaced? I know that in Minnesota, we all have life jackets in the garage, and how do you know when they're too old other than faded and tattered? Is there a Coast Guard website?
I don't know off the top of my head. I would imagine there is. I was just going to try to look it up. But the Coast Guard regulates life jackets. So I would imagine that they would, the DNR might also have information about that. But the things that I look for are, is the color of the fabric faded? So it was once red and now it's pink. And you won't necessarily know that, but you can usually see because the colors will be uneven across the fabric. If that fabric is faded, it's not necessarily that the fabric is bad, but it means that the life jacket has been out in the sun a lot and is old, and that can affect the flotation. If there are any rips or tears in the fabric, so if you can like see any foam poking out or anything like that, or you see a rip or tear, that's an issue. If any of the straps are frayed or torn, if any of the buckles or those kind of plastic adjustment pieces that allow you to loosen or tighten the straps, if any of those are broken at all or missing, if the zipper doesn't go up and down or doesn't stay up if it has a zipper, and also if you squeeze the foam inside the life jacket that's in between the fabric, if you squeeze it and that foam doesn't come back to what it was before you squeezed it, it's not good. It's not going to keep you floating well. So those are the things that I look for. I'm sure that there are example photos someplace online, and I will, for the next time I do something like this, I'll have a website ready for that. I appreciate the question. But I think those are the main things. Oh, the other thing I guess I would say is that label, the Coast Guard approval label that's inside the life jacket that tells you what type of PFD it is, what the weight rating is for it, and all of that. If you can't read it because it's so peeling off or it's gone, that life jacket is probably too old and I would get a new one.
Right. They're not that expensive and it's better to be safe than sorry.
Absolutely.
I believe that's the last question. I really, really want to thank you. You did a wonderful job talking about the program. And also just remember that there are options to try paddling at the state parks or at the Three Rivers Parks, or if you already are paddling, the Boundary Waters Canoe Program. It's a nice way for women to try out the Boundary Waters with a supportive group. Just email me at linda.bylander@state.mn.us if you want any help, or Allie Dart at Three Rivers Park. So I really thank you, Allie. Next week, I want you to come on back. We're going to have managing your family lakeshore for recreation and for fish. Try to keep our fish healthy out there and you're managing your lakeshore. But if there's no other questions, and I don't think I see any, I want to thank you and we're going to sign off. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.